The world calls it progressivism. It calls it tolerance. It calls it spiritual evolution. Inside many churches today, there is a spirit operating that leaders recognize but refuse to name, because naming it comes with a cost. What is happening is not new. Exactly 2,800 years ago, a king of Israel made the same mistake. And the text recorded what came after. It puts into the right perspective what it means to say that a pattern has a 2,800-year historical record. It means that before any progressive movement within modern Christianity, before any conference on inclusion and revised spirituality, before any pastor who decided that love accepts everything and confronts nothing, the pattern already had a name, a specific name, a female name, the name of a Phoenician princess who arrived in Israel carrying not only her clothes and jewelry, but an entire spiritual architecture of domination, seduction, and silencing that the people of God had never seen operating so close to the throne. The name is Jezebel. And before you decide this is the language of an overwrought preacher, observe what the text says. The first book of Kings, chapter 16, verses 31 to 33, presents the record with the coldness of a historical document. Achabe, son of Omri, king of the northern kingdom of Israel, took as his wife Jezebel, daughter of Etbaal, king of the Sidonios. It wasn't romantic love that crossed religious borders. It was a calculated political alliance. Etbaal was a priest of Baal, who came to power by murdering the previous king. Jezebel was not just a woman from outside the borders of Israel, she was the organic representative of a complete spiritual system with hierarchy, rituals, prophets, and a logic of power that functioned radically differently from everything the people of the Lord had known since the days of Moises. Achabe was fully aware of what he was bringing inside the borders of his kingdom. Fully. And he brought it anyway. The reign of Achabe lasted 22 years, from 874 to 852 years before Christ. In no other northern reign was apostasy so systematically organized, so structurally sustained, so publicly legitimized. Because Jezebel did not just practice her religion in private, she built infrastructure. She brought to Israel 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah, 850 representatives of a rival spiritual system maintained at the expense of the royal table, as recorded in the first book of Kings, chapter 18, verse 19. She did not just introduce idolatry within the borders of Israel, she professionalized it, institutionalized it, gave it a salary and an address. And at the same time, with the same hand that signed the payment of the prophets of Baal, she persecuted and killed the prophets of the Lord. She didn't silence them, she killed them. The prophet Obadiah, servant of the king and a man of genuine faith within a corrupted power structure, hid 100 prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each, providing them with bread and water so they would not die, as recorded in the first book of Kings, chapter 18, verse 4. Measure what this detail reveals. The persecution was so systematic and so efficient that it was necessary to hide prophets in groups of 50 inside caves just so they would survive. Israel had not experienced this, even during the worst incursions of external enemies. The most lethal danger for those who spoke the truth came from within. It came from the palace. This is where the understanding of what the texts call the spirit of Jezebel begins. It is not a devotional metaphor. It is a spiritual category with identifiable mechanisms, recognizable patterns, and documented historical consequences. And the first mechanism, the most fundamental, the one that makes all others possible, is substitution. Jezebel did not openly destroy what was sacred in Israel. She worked through gradual exchange. She replaced the altars of the Lord with altars of Baal. She replaced the prophets of God with prophets who legitimized power. She replaced the voice that confronted the king with a voice that validated him. This is the central pattern of the spirit that bears her name. It does not deny the sacred, it redefines it. It does not say that God does not exist, it says that God accepts everything. It does not eliminate worship, it transforms worship into a spectacle that serves human comfort and the consolidation of the power of those who control it. And the practical result is identical to what happened in Israel. The people no longer know how to distinguish what is of God from what is a human construction dressed in divine language. This is the entry point. This is exactly where the process of capturing a congregation begins. Follow the reasoning closely. The prophet Elias, confronting Akabe in the first book of Kings, chapter 18, verse 21, asks the people gathered on Monte Carmelo how many of them will continue limping between two thoughts. In Hebrew, the word carries the idea of dancing from one side to the other without a defined direction, refusing the choice as a way to avoid paying the cost it demands. And the text records something that should paralyze any attentive reader. The people did not answer a word. Total silence. 450 prophets of Baal on one side, a single prophet of the Lord on the other, and the people of Israel remained in absolute silence. This silence has a name. It is the product of what the spirit of Jezebel generates when it operates without contestation within a faith community for long enough. Spiritual paralysis. The inability to distinguish, to choose, to confront. A people who still attend the temple, still use religious language, still identify as belonging to the Lord, but who can no longer discern what is real from what is an imitation, who confuse silence with peace, absence of conflict with harmony, accommodation with spiritual maturity. And here is the first question that the historical record places before you. If 850 prophets maintained by the state, decades of institutional apostasy, and the systematic persecution of those who spoke the truth, produced this silence in Israel, what are decades of the theology of comfort, of sermons built not to disturb, of leadership that chose approval instead of confrontation, producing within 21st century congregations? Observe what the data of the present shows. There are more than 2,300,000,000 people who identify as Christians in the world today, distributed among tens of thousands of denominations, hundreds of independent movements, thousands of different theological expressions. Within this universe, there is a process underway that is not new and is not accidental. A growing number of congregations are going through the same process that transformed the northern kingdom of Israel into what the text calls apostasy. Not all at once, gradually, through the progressive substitution of what confronts with what comforts, of what is prophetic with what is palatable, of what separates the sacred from the profane with what dissolves them into a mixture of generic spirituality and social approval. You don't notice when you are inside. This is the most disturbing trait of the capture process. Because the spirit of Jezebel does not arrive announcing change. It never has. Not in Israel, not in Thyatira, not in 21st century churches. It arrives announcing growth. It arrives with the language of inclusion, of reach, of unconditional love. The first alterations seem minor, a language adjustment here, a softening of a position there. The word sin begins to appear less frequently in Sunday services. The idea of judgment becomes too uncomfortable for the 70 minutes of spiritual experience the congregation expects. The verses that confront are mentioned with increasing reservation. We need to understand the historical context. This text was written for a culturally specific situation. The love of God is greater than any rigid interpretation. And slowly, over months and years that accumulate without anyone marking the date of the turn, the congregation is reconfigured, not in its external form, which remains intact with its rituals and schedules, but in its internal capacity to discern, to name, to confront what needs to be confronted. When the leaders finally realize what has happened, it is too late. Or worse, they have already realized it for years and chose the silence of Akabe. The text of Apocalypse, chapter 2, verse 20, was written approximately 60 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christo. Juan, exiled on the island of Patmos, receives specific messages for 7 churches in Asia Minor. And the message for the congregation of Thyatira contains something that should be read with redoubled attention by anyone who leads or attends a faith community today. Not because it is an abstract warning about moral behavior, but because what Jesus says to that congregation is the recognition that the same pattern that destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel 700 years earlier had resurfaced within a Christian community that had works and faith and service and perseverance, all the external virtues of an apparently healthy congregation, and that was nonetheless being consumed from within. I have against you that you tolerate the woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, and teaches and seduces my servants to practice sexual immorality and to eat things sacrificed to idols. Follow the reasoning with all the precision it demands. Juan is not saying that a woman named Jezebel was literally present in the congregation of Thyatira. He is using the name as a historical code, as a recognizable spiritual category for anyone formed in the texts. He is saying that the same operational pattern that destroyed Israel in 852 years before Christ had installed itself within a first-century Christian community. And the verb Jesus uses to describe the response of the congregation's leadership to this is the same verb that describes the posture of Akabe during 22 years of shared reign with Jezebel. Tolerate, not ignore. To tolerate implies knowledge. It implies that the leadership saw, recognized, named in private conversations, and chose not to act publicly. Because acting publicly has a cost that many leaders calculate as too high. The cost of the division that will be attributed to the one who confronts, not to the one who seduced. The cost of the reputation of being intolerant, of someone who has not grown spiritually enough to understand that the love of God does not judge. Elias discovered this cost the day after the greatest miracle of his life. Consider what happened on Monte Carmelo, recorded in the first book of Kings, chapter 18. Elias alone, against 850 prophets of the state religious system. Fire came down upon the altar of the Lord and consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, the dust, and licked up the water in the trenches. The people fell on their faces and recognized the Lord. The prophets of Baal were executed by the stream of Quison, a victory so absolute that there was no possible ambiguity about whose side the real power was on. And in the following chapter, in the first book of Kings, chapter 19, verse 2, Jezebel sends a message to Elias. In 24 hours, your life will end in the same way the life of each of the prophets of Baal ended. A threat sent by a messenger. Just words. And the man who had just faced 850 false prophets alone fled to the desert, wanting to die. He sat under a broom tree and asked God to end his existence. The greatest prophet active in Israel reduced to collapse by a message that did not have a single soldier behind it. Why? Because the spirit that bears the name of Jezebel does not operate by physical force. It operates by psychological terror, by the threat of exposure, of public humiliation, of the destruction of reputation. Akabe had the army. Jezebel had the power to redefine the narrative, to transform the prophet into a troubler, to make the people who had fallen on their faces before the Lord begin to doubt what they had seen. This mechanism is identical to what operates in congregations today. Whoever names what is happening is immediately classified as a divider, as intolerant, as someone who has not matured enough to understand the love of God. The weapon has changed form. The logic is the same. The goal is the same: to silence the voice that confronts before it produces consequences that the system cannot control. Elias walked 40 days and 40 nights to Monte Horebe, and God does not speak to him in the strong wind, nor in the earthquake, nor in the fire. He speaks in the delicate and soft voice that comes after all these manifestations, according to the first book of Kings, chapter 19, verses 11 and 12. And then he reveals something that completely transforms the prophet's perception of his situation and of the real spiritual state of Israel. 7,000. In Israel, 7,000 people who did not bow their knee to Baal and whose mouths did not kiss him, whom Jezebel's system had managed to make invisible, silent, scattered across the country without connecting with one another. But they existed, and God knew them by name. 7,000. The strategy of the spirit of Jezebel always includes, as an essential component, the production of perceived isolation, the feeling that whoever still speaks the truth is completely alone, that the consensus has been established by the wrong side, that resisting is eccentric and useless. But the 7,000 existed, silent, invisible to one another. But they existed. This detail is not minor. It is the difference between giving up and continuing. Now measure the most sophisticated mechanism that this spirit uses within a congregation. The case recorded in the first book of Kings, chapter 21, is the most precise operation manual that exists on how it captures and destroys within a context where law and institutional processes still formally exist, where rights are still observed, where the appearance of legitimate procedure is carefully maintained. Nabote of Jezreel had a vineyard inherited from his ancestors. King Akabe wanted that vineyard. It was near the palace and would serve as a vegetable garden. He offered a fair price or a better vineyard in exchange. Nabote refused for a specific theological reason. The law of Moises forbade the permanent alienation of tribal family inheritance. Nabote was doing exactly what the sacred text determined. Akabe returned to the palace sulking, lay on his bed turned to the wall, and would not eat. An infantile response from an adult king to a legal and grounded refusal. And it was then that Jezebel acted. She did not use brute force. She did not simply order Nabote's execution. She used the system. She wrote letters in Akabe's name, sealed with the royal seal, instructing the elders and nobles of the city to call a public fast, an act of deeply sacred appearance, of unquestionable religious connotation. And within this context of ritual and solemnity, they were to present two men as false witnesses against Nabote, accusing him of blasphemy against God and against the king. The legal procedure was followed to the letter. The appearance of justice was impeccably maintained, and Nabote was stoned to death for a crime he never committed, within a process that obeyed all the formalities the law required. Observe what the records show. Jezebel did not tear up the law. She used it as an instrument of injustice. She did not eliminate the sacred ritual. She used the ritual as cover for the crime. This is the degree of sophistication that operates when this spirit is in full activity within a religious institution. Everything seems to follow the correct protocols, meetings happen, documents are approved, and in the end, the innocent is destroyed, and the one who architected the destruction received what they wanted without having publicly stained their hands. Within churches, this pattern manifests with a fidelity to the original that would be disconcerting if it were not so consistently documented throughout history. The pastor or leader who confronts what is happening is not executed. He is demoralized. Witnesses are raised against him, most often people he himself loved and served for years, who describe him with the most contemporary language available: controlling, abusive, incapable of receiving correction. The institutional process follows its rites. Assemblies are called. And in the end, the prophet is out of the congregation, and the spirit remains inside, now with even less resistance than there was before. Jezebel said to Achabe, "Arise, eat and be cheerful. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth of Jezreel." And Achabe arose, went down to take possession of the vineyard. The text does not record any questioning by Achabe about the process by which the vineyard was obtained, not because he didn't know, because he chose not to know, because the result was convenient and the cost of investigating was too high. This complicity was not passive, it was structural. Achabe was the final instrument of the entire process, and the text holds him responsible with the same clarity with which it holds Jezebel responsible. The text of Apocalypse, chapter 2, verses 21 to 23, is explicit about what happens when this pattern operates without being confronted within a congregation. Jesus says he gave this spirit time to repent and that it did not take advantage of the time available. And then he announces 3 specific and progressive consequences. He will cast this spirit onto a bed of suffering. He will place those who practice spiritual adultery with it in great tribulation, and he will strike its children with death. The text is not using soft, metaphorical language. It is using language of judgment with the same precision that Elias used when he pronounced the word of the Lord over Achabe in the field of Naboth. Children. What the text of Apocalypse calls the children of this spirit are the generations formed within a congregation dominated by it. The people who grew up learning that tolerance is the supreme virtue, that confrontation is an absence of love, that accommodation is spiritual maturity. An entire generation formed to no longer be able to discern, to call grace what the text calls judgment, to call spiritual evolution what the text calls apostasy. This is the most devastating heritage. It is not the immediate and visible damage. It is the spiritual incapacity transmitted from generation to generation within a community that still calls itself Christian, still performs its worship, still celebrates its dates, but which in practice can no longer operate by the criteria of the text it claims to follow. An acquired blindness that looks like theological sophistication, a paralysis that looks like openness, a silence that looks like peace. Follow what the historical records show about the inevitable fate of the system built by Jezebel. The reign of Achabe ended on the battlefield, as recorded in the first book of Kings, chapter 22. The son, Achazias, reigned for 2 years, continuing the same pattern. The second son, Joram, reigned for 12 years, and likewise. 44 accumulated years of domination of this spirit over the northern kingdom. But God had promised a reckoning, and the reckoning was meticulous, recorded in the second book of Kings, chapter 9. The anointing of Jehu as king, with the specific mission to end the lineage of Achabe and dismantle the spiritual system that Jezebel had built. Joram was killed in the field of Naboth, in the exact piece of land taken by the judicial murder of an innocent, fulfilling word for word the prophecy that Elias had declared to Achabe in the first book of Kings, chapter 21, verses 19 to 24, decades earlier. Jezebel was thrown from the window. Horses trampled over her. When they went to bury her, they found only the skull, the feet, and the hands. The rest had been consumed by dogs, exactly as Elias had prophesied. The text is specific in every detail. The fulfillment was specific in every detail. Nothing in this story is metaphor. It is a verifiable historical record of how the Lord of the sacred texts deals with what he tolerates for a determined time and then ends with surgical precision. The text was not wrong. Consider the weight of the drought before the reckoning. For 3 years and 6 months, it did not rain in Israel. 42 months of drought over the land, crops destroyed, herds decimated, hunger advancing. And all this within a kingdom that had the most sophisticated religious apparatus of its generation. 850 active prophets, altars built and maintained, rituals performed with regularity. A spiritual infrastructure immensely larger than that of Elias, who was alone without an altar and without institutional support. And the rain did not come, because the issue was never the size of the religious structure, it was the presence of the Lord within it. A congregation can have the largest budget in its city, the most sophisticated production, the most efficient marketing on social media, the most impressive numerical reach, and be completely dry inside. Not because people are not present, but because what is being cultivated within it is not what the text describes as spiritual life. It is performance. It is spectacle. It is the modern equivalent of the 850 prophets who cried out and danced around the altar of Baal for hours, and the fire did not come down. The fire does not come down upon an imitation. This is the line that separates what the text calls revival from what it calls apostasy. The fire comes down where the presence is real. The presence is real where the truth is maintained without negotiation, where the cost of confrontation is accepted as part of the calling, where the voice that says what is necessary is not silenced by the mechanisms of Jezebel, but honored as what the text has always called prophecy. The first book of Kings, chapter 18, verse 17, records that when Achabe saw Elias for the first time after 3 years and 6 months of drought, the king's first words were, "Is it you, the troubler of Israel?" 850 prophets sustained by the royal crown, 3 years and 6 months of drought destroying the kingdom, a judicial murder planned by the queen, and the guilty one calls the prophet a troubler. When you see an ecclesiastical leadership using the words division, lack of love, religious spirit to describe those who raise legitimate questions about what is being taught and practiced, you are seeing the exact reflection of Achabe calling Elias the troubler of Israel. The language has updated, the logic is identical. The goal is the same: to reframe the confrontation as the problem, transform the prophet into a troubler, and ensure the system continues operating without interruption. There is no way to reform from within a congregation captured by this spirit if the central leadership has already been completely domesticated by it, not because the people who lead are necessarily evil, but because the mechanism includes the production of such a deep loyalty to the captured leader and such a reflexive hostility to any voice of external confrontation that the system self-regulates without conscious effort. Any Elias who appears will be isolated, will be attacked, will be described with the same words Jezebel used centuries before: troubler, divider, enemy of the peace that the community built at the price of silence. The text was not wrong. It was not wrong with Jezebel in 852 years before Christ. It was not wrong with the congregation of Thyatira in the 1st century. Exactly 2,800 years ago, a king of Israel had the chance to stand up and confront the spirit that had taken over his kingdom. He chose silence. He chose the convenience of the vineyard obtained through Jezebel's process. He chose the 850 prophets who legitimized his power instead of the only prophet who told the truth. And the text recorded with the coldness of one documenting without distortion what came after. The book of Apocalypse, chapter 2, was not written for a single 1st century congregation. It was written as a warning for every generation that repeats the pattern. The pattern is being repeated now on a global scale within institutions that bear the Christian name, but operate under a different logic. The text does not say that this spirit will be tolerated forever. It says there will be a reckoning with the same specificity and the same fidelity of fulfillment that characterized the end of Jezebel, the end of Achabe, and the end of everything they built within Israel during decades of organized apostasy. The question is not if this will happen. The question is which side of history you will be on when it happens. 2,800 years of historical record say the same thing with the same consistency, without a single prophesied detail having gone unfulfilled. The spirit that seduces, that silences, and that substitutes has no life of its own. It operates only as long as it finds tolerance within those who have the authority to end its operation and choose not to do so. And when tolerance ends, when someone appears willing to be what Elias was, inconvenient, persecuted, and impossible to silence, the system that seemed consolidated collapses with a speed that surprises even those who built it brick by brick for decades. The text was not wrong. It will not be wrong now. Be.